The morning was calm, sun streaming through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the sidewalk as I adjusted my camera tripod near the edge of the park trail. I wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just testing out a new lens for my nature photography project. Birds chirped above, and a squirrel darted across the path. It was one of those mornings where nothing felt urgent. I'd parked legally along the curb, stepped onto the public greenbelt bordering a gated suburban community, and began filming the blooming wildflowers. That's when I heard the voice. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned around slowly, unsure if the question was even directed at me. But it was. Standing a few feet away was a woman in her late 50s, platinum blonde bob, yoga pants too tight for comfort, holding a leash with a small dog that barked like it had something to prove. She had the energy of someone who'd filed too many complaints and had never been told no convincingly in her life. "I'm filming," I said plainly, motioning to the camera in the open trail. "It's for a personal project." "This is private property," she snapped, folding her arms. "You can't just stand around here like that. We have rules." I glanced around. No sign, no gate, no fence. Just sidewalk, grass, and trail, clearly maintained by the city. "I'm pretty sure this is public land," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I looked it up before coming here." She squinted at me like I'd just told her gravity was optional. "I'm the HOA president here. I know what's private, and we don't allow this sort of activity." I tilted my head slightly. "What sort of activity?" She didn't answer right away. Her lips tightened, her hand clenched the leash harder. The dog kept yapping, but her glare was sharper than its bark. "I'm calling the police," she said. "You look suspicious. You're not from around here." I blinked. Suspicious? For filming flowers. She already had her phone out. "Yes. Trespassing. You're probably casing homes or harassing residents. You people think you can just walk into any neighborhood and do whatever you want." There it was. The coded language. You people. I could feel it in my gut, the ugly undertones. I took a step back, raised both hands slightly, not in surrender, but in calm assertion. "I'm not breaking any law. I'm standing on public land, minding my business." She didn't care. She was already talking to 911, loudly. "Yes, police? I have a man here, black male, early 30s, wearing a gray hoodie, filming our property. I'm afraid for my safety." I wasn't even wearing a hoodie, just a brown jacket. But details didn't matter to her. Only the narrative she was crafting, and the way she was performing it loudly enough for a few neighbors to start peeking out their windows. A car slowed down as it passed. A couple walking their golden retriever across the street paused, watching. The tension was growing, turning visible. The kind that vibrates just beneath the skin, awkward glances, unsure whispers, phones discreetly lifted to record. I stood still. I'd learned long ago not to argue with people like her. Not because they are right, but because they feed on conflict. And they have a way of making your calm look like guilt. The 911 operator must have told her officers were en route because she ended the call triumphantly and smiled like she'd just won a lawsuit. "They'll be here any minute," she said with satisfaction. "Let's see how brave you are then." "I'll wait," I said simply, returning my attention to the camera. I wasn't going to let her define the moment, but I felt the pressure growing. The stares, the way everyone seemed to be waiting for me to snap or run. Instead, I took a breath and sat down slowly on the bench by the trail. The dog was still barking. Karen was pacing now, glancing toward the road as if counting the seconds until the police arrived and handed her just as tied up in handcuffs. She had no idea what her call had just triggered, because somewhere, miles away, someone else had received a very different kind of alert. Not the police, not the HOA, but people who knew who I really was. People who'd been watching, not out of suspicion, but out of loyalty, out of respect. Karen thought she'd caught just another outsider, but she didn't know who was watching my back. Back in a secure federal building tucked behind reinforced glass and coded keypads, an alert pinged a screen with a low chime. Nothing flashy, just a subtle buzz in a quiet room full of monitors and files. A man in a dark suit and crisp white shirt sipped black coffee as he read the details of the alert. His name, Major Daniel Reese, 48, U.S. Army Intelligence, retired. Now part of a special civilian military liaison unit for Homeland Integrity, a department created quietly post 9/11 to monitor and respond to federal personnel threats, even those long removed from active duty. The name on the report triggered an automatic protocol. Me, not because I was a threat, but because I had been designated Tier 2 protected, a rare status. Years ago, during a covert assignment in South Asia, I'd worked alongside deep agents and military intelligence units. After a betrayal within the chain of command nearly cost a dozen lives, I'd testified in classified hearings, my actions helping expose a high-ranking corruption ring. I'd never asked for recognition. I wanted to disappear, to go back to a quiet life, do my work in peace. But quietly, they tagged my identity in a security database. It meant any federal, state, or municipal enforcement contact within U.S. jurisdiction would trigger a silent review. Not full-blown surveillance, just protection in the background. A signal that someone important might be at risk of being wrongly treated. Karen's 911 call had activated that signal. At the local county dispatch, the operator had entered basic details. Black male, 30s, recording video near HOA property. Most calls like this didn't trigger much. But when the system linked my name and location through triangulated tower data, something changed. A blinking icon appeared on the federal console in D.C., flagged for Federal Protective Awareness. Major Reese leaned forward, reading Karen's recorded 911 transcript and frowning. He tapped his screen twice, pulling up my internal file. Ezra Cole, former agency asset. Record sealed. Cleared Tier 2. No criminal background. Under protective observation since 2019. He muttered to himself, "Not this again." He picked up a secured phone and dialed a line that rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. "Commander Ross, we've got a situation. Willow Bend Park. A call came in on Ezra Cole." There was a pause. Who flagged it? Local 911. False claim. HOA resident. It's probably another Karen. Russ exhaled slowly. "I'll handle it. How far out's our nearest support?" "Two Humv already en route on training exercises nearby. That's your cover. ETA 11 minutes. Back in the suburbs, the situation had already started to escalate. Karen, now smug with anticipation, paced as a sheriff's vehicle rolled up, light spinning. A tall deputy stepped out, sunglasses on, hand resting near his belt. He looked at me, at my tripod, then at her. "There! That's him." She barked. "Is trespassing, taking illegal photos of our homes. He has fake documents. He's aggressive. I was scared for my life." The deputy raised a hand, calm. "I'm going to ask you to step back. Let me assess." He walked toward me cautiously. "Sir, can I see some ID?" I handed it to him silently, cool and steady. He glanced at it and paused. His radio buzzed. A short, clipped voice came through. "Unit 4, stand down. Federal Response Team inbound. Do not engage. Subject identified and cleared. Stand by." The deputy stiffened. Something shifted in his demeanor. His tone softened. "Mr. Cole, just hang tight here. I've been told we've got someone else coming in to handle this." Karen overheard, face scrunching in confusion. "What do you mean? Handle what? He's clearly trespassing." The officer said carefully, "We're reviewing the situation. Please remain on the sidewalk." "You're taking his side." She spat, her voice rising. "You don't even know what he's doing. He could be dangerous." But the officer's attention was no longer on her. Down the street, engines rumbled, a low, thundering sound that didn't belong to regular patrol cars. Karen turned to, and froze. 2 olive-drab military Humvs rolled around the bend, tires kicking up gravel. A second later, a matte black SUV pulled in behind them. Soldiers stepped out, uniformed, serious, moving with a kind of purpose that made civilians instinctively get out of the way. A commanding figure stepped out of the SUV. Commander Ross, mid-50s, calm and lethal in demeanor. He approached the scene, nodded at me with quiet respect, then turned to the deputy. This man is under federal observation protection. We're here to resolve the situation. Karen's jaw dropped. Federal protection? What are you talking about? Russ turned to her, voice ice cold. You made a false claim against a civilian protected under federal protocol. Your accusations, your use of law enforcement resources, and your harassment could qualify as a civil rights violation. Her lips parted. No words came out. Russ stepped closer, eyes unblinking. You had no idea who you were calling the cops on, did you? She didn't. But now, the whole neighborhood was finding out. Karen stood frozen. Her confidence, which had towered over the situation just minutes ago, now cracked like thin ice under pressure. The sight of uniformed soldiers stepping from the hums, flanking the area with calm precision, sent ripples through the neighborhood. Lawnmowers shut off. Curtains shifted. Phones came out, recording every second. She was realizing too late this wasn't going her way. Commander Russ moved with quiet authority, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the gathered crowd. He approached Deputy Nolan, speaking low and firm. We have verified identification. Mr. Ezra Cole is a federal protected civilian, Tier 2 clearance. That means any civilian harassment or obstruction is taken seriously under Homeland Integrity guidelines. Karen blinked rapidly. This is insane. You're making it sound like some kind of spy. Russ didn't flinch. He's not a threat, but he is someone we keep eyes on for his protection. He has contributed to national operations that are still considered sensitive. Your accusations and aggressive behavior triggered an alert. I didn't know, she snapped, flustered. He was filming. On our sidewalk. I was defending the community. From what exactly? Russ asked sharply. A man with a tripod? Or your own assumptions? The silence that followed was heavy. Meanwhile, I stood quietly, hands in my pockets, watching it all unfold. I didn't need to say a word. The system I never asked to be part of, one I thought I'd left behind years ago, was now standing up for me. It felt strange, powerful, vindicating. A soldier stepped forward and whispered something to Ross. He nodded and turned to me. Mr. Cole, we've secured the area. If you're comfortable, we'd like to walk you through a basic debrief here on site, just to log the encounter. Standard. I nodded. Fine with me. Karen scoffed. Debrief? What is this, a movie? No, Russ replied coolly. This is real life, where your assumptions could have ended in something far worse. She was beginning to understand. The scene was no longer hers to control. She turned to the growing crowd for backup, but the support wasn't there. Neighbors who once smiled at her during HOA barbecues now kept their distance. A few even muttered, she went too far this time. Ross gestured to a soldier holding a tablet. The officer walked over to Deputy Nolan and showed him footage from the drone I'd been flying earlier. Here's your evidence, Russ said. No trespassing, no property violations, no threats, just aerial shots of the sidewalk and green space. Completely legal. Deputy Nolan scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, looks clean. Karen's voice cracked as she tried one more angle. He didn't look like he belonged here. And there it was. The word she hadn't said before. The real reason she called. The sentence that echoed far louder than she realized. Commander Russ's face hardened. I'm going to remind you that your HOA's regulations don't override civil rights. Nor do they justify targeting people based on appearance or background. Karen swallowed hard. Her posture was different now. Smaller. Deflated. I spoke for the first time since the soldiers arrived. You could have asked what I was doing. You could have walked over, introduced yourself. I would have explained I was filming a short nature piece for a veterans' mental health campaign. She didn't respond. Russ turned toward me. We'll be filing a formal report on this incident. Your status has been reaffirmed, and we'll be reviewing whether local law enforcement needs additional training on recognizing protected status indicators and ID systems. Karen glanced between us. What does that mean for me? It means, Russ replied, you might want to start understanding the difference between concern and profiling. She backed up slightly, her voice lower. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause all this. I nodded. Maybe next time, listen before you assume. She said nothing more. The soldiers began to return to their vehicles, and Ross gave me a nod of respect. If you need anything, you have a number. With a calm finality, the convoy departed, leaving behind stunned silence and a very different neighborhood energy. Karen turned and walked away, not with the confident step she had started with, but with a slow gait of someone who had just realized the world was bigger than her gated community. I remained on the sidewalk, camera still recording, letting it all soak in. Sometimes you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. The next day, the neighborhood wasn't the same. Word spread faster than wildfire, first through whispers on porches, then in local group chats, and finally with grainy videos posted online. Videos that showed Karen shouting, the soldiers arriving, and me standing calmly as the entire narrative flipped on its head. By noon, I couldn't walk down the sidewalk without people watching me a little differently. Not with suspicion anymore, with curiosity, with quiet guilt. Some even nodded respectfully. And a few? They couldn't meet my eyes at all. By 2 p.m., the HOA emergency meeting had been called. Held in the usual clubhouse, once a sterile space for barbecue announcements and arguments about grass length, it now buzzed with a tense energy. Residents showed up in droves. Karen, once the queen of that space, stood at the front of the room, her usual smugness replaced by a shaky smile and an overcompensating tone. Let's all remember that yesterday's events were unfortunate and things got out of hand, she said, her voice echoing awkwardly. A man near the back raised his hand. Out of hand. Karen, you called the cops on a neighbor who was doing nothing wrong, and then the army showed up. There was scattered applause. Karen's face twitched. Well, how was I supposed to know he was? Important, another woman asked. That's the problem. You wouldn't have cared if he wasn't. You assumed he didn't belong. She called it our sidewalk, someone added, as if the rest of us don't walk it every day. Karen started to respond but faltered when the HOA vice president, Mr. Jensen, a man who rarely spoke, stood up. I reviewed the incident, watched the footage, read the federal report that followed. Ezra Cole wasn't just cleared of wrongdoing. He was harassed by one of us. The room fell silent. He turned to me, seated near the back. Mr. Cole, we owe you an apology, not because of your background, not because of the soldiers, but because you're our neighbor, and that should have been enough. I nodded slowly, choosing my words carefully. I didn't move here to be some hidden figure or special case. I just wanted quiet, nature, a sense of community. Yesterday reminded me that some people only offer community to those who look and act like them. Karen tried to interject. I already said I was sorry. No, said Jensen, raising a hand. You justified. You haven't owned what you did. A resident near the window, an older black woman named Mrs. Leona, spoke for the first time. Yesterday was déjà vu for some of us, she said softly. Not because soldiers showed up, but because people like Karen have been calling cops on people like us for years. She just happened to call the wrong one this time. Several heads nodded. Karen's voice cracked. I didn't mean to be racist. I was scared. He had a drone. I had a permit, I said, calmly, which you didn't bother to ask about. You saw a man with brown skin, filming near your lawn, and your first thought was criminal, not neighbor. The room froze. Even Karen didn't deny it. Mr. Jensen cleared his throat. This board will be implementing new training, cultural awareness, de-escalation, legal boundaries. And Karen, we'll be voting on your position at the next meeting. Her jaw fell. You're removing me? I made this HOA. You also almost made national news for the wrong reasons, Jensen replied coldly. It's time we start representing all our residents. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me. Some just said thank you. Others shared their own quiet stories, times they felt othered, misunderstood, or falsely accused. The air was different now, more honest, less polished. And Karen? She didn't stick around. She stormed out, her heels clicking down the pavement, head held high, but eyes darting, knowing the control she once held had shattered. Later that evening, I returned to the same spot on the sidewalk where it all happened. Same light breeze, Same hummingbirds. But the space felt different, heavier with truth, lighter with justice. An older man approached me. "Hey, just wanted to say, I didn't know about your service or your background, but I saw how you handled everything. With patience, with grace. That says more about you than any badge or military file ever could." I smiled, nodded. "Appreciate that." He paused. "You think she'll change?" I looked toward Karen's house. Lights off, blinds pulled. Maybe, or maybe the rest of the neighborhood will. 3 days after the incident, I got a call. Not from the local police, not from the HOA, from the Department of the Interior. A calm voice said, "Mr. Cole, we'd like to formally debrief you on what happened in Willow Crest. There are documents and implications you may want to sit in." I'd already figured there was more to this story than a simple Karen meltdown, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. That Friday morning, I drove into the federal building downtown. Clean, white walls, glass doors, a seal of the Bureau of Indian Affairs stamped in gold behind the receptionist. They guided me to a private conference room. There, waiting, was a man I'd met once before, Agent David Liu. We shook hands. "Thanks for coming," he said. "And thank you for staying calm during that entire situation. A lot of people would have escalated it. You didn't." "I've seen worse," I replied. He nodded. "I know. That's partly why we wanted to speak with you today." Agent Liu placed a thick file on the table. "There's something you should see." He opened it and flipped through page after page of historical records, maps, typewritten letters, photocopied deeds. My family name was all over them. Your great-grandfather's land grant wasn't just for your cabin. In 1897, under the Indian Allotment Act, he was made legal steward of over 180 acres. Most of modern-day Willow Crest sits on that. I blinked. "You're telling me Karen's house is on my land?" "In a manner of speaking, yes," he said, "but it's more complicated. In the 1950s, your family's land was quietly parceled and sold to developers. Fraudulent signatures, intimidation. Some of the officials involved are now notable names. Judges, county planners, real estate moguls." I leaned forward. "Let me guess. One of them was Laura Mitchell's grandfather." Lou flipped a page and pointed to a black-and-white photograph. A man in a stiff government uniform, holding a cigar, standing in front of a bulldozer next to a sign that said "Future Site of Willow Crest Homes." "Edward Mitchell," he confirmed, "oversaw the forced removal of at least 8 native families from the area, yours included. He used fraud paperwork to seize parcels and push through permits that violated early federal preservation law. And nobody caught this. Not until your 2010 complaint. But it got buried, coincidentally, by Judge Robert Vance." I sat back in my chair. "Laura's ex-husband." "Exactly." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "We got access to sealed court records. Turns out, Vance quashed 2 investigations into Willow Crest land history, both triggered by residents reporting suspicious land titles." He slid me the documents. One was a complaint filed by a Cherokee elder in 1996, alleging that Willow Crest had been built over a protected trail. The other, a handwritten letter from my own grandfather, sent in 1987 to the Department of Justice. I never even knew he wrote that. I said, voice low. "They buried it." Lou replied, "All of it, until you showed up with a drone and a federal document that triggered our system." A silence hung between us. "What happens now?" I finally asked. Lou tapped the file. "Now we investigate. Your claim is legitimate. The HOA may technically exist on paper, but it was built on land never properly transferred. Meaning, they don't own it." "Correct. And if we can prove that, a lot of their restrictions and enforcement actions are invalid." I sat with that truth for a moment. The idea that Karen, who once told me to go back to wherever I came from, was living on land my ancestors built with their bare hands, only to be pushed out under threat and silence. Does she know? I asked. We've informed her legal team. She hasn't responded, but we did issue a formal notice to the HOA board. I stood up and looked out the window. Below, The city moved like any other day, but everything had changed. What can I do? I asked. Lou smiled faintly. Tell your story. Help us restore what was taken. Not just the land, our history, too. You're not just a victim of bad policing. You're the legal successor to a buried legacy. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the old cedar box my grandfather once kept beneath his bed. Inside, yellowed photographs, his military medals, and a folded map with tiny handwritten notes, markings of streams, burial grounds, footpaths, places that no longer existed on Google Maps, but lived in memory. I traced one of the lines with my finger. The same trail Karen tried to block with her private property sign had once connected 3 Cherokee homes. My grandfather had walked it barefoot as a child. That path wasn't just aid. It was a link to something bigger. I finally understood what he meant when he used to say, "Some land remembers who loved it." The next morning, I walked the trail again. Same boots, same hat. But this time, neighbors waved. One even apologized. A man with his son offered to help trim overgrowth around the cabin. Karen's house sat silent. Her shutters were closed, her porch empty. But she knew. Somewhere inside, she knew the truth had found her. And this time, it had papers to prove it. Later that week, a local reporter contacted me. She'd seen the footage, heard rumors of the federal probe, and wanted to do a feature. I agreed, not to shame Karen, not to seek fame, but because silence had protected the wrong people for too long. And because this wasn't just about a mistaken 911 call. It was about all the people who were erased so someone else could plant a prettier mailbox. The air was crisp that morning. A quiet wind moved through the pines as I stood at the edge of the Willow Crest Trail, no longer marked private property. That sign was gone, replaced by a handcrafted wooden post engraved in Cherokee and English. Seli Uwivlawohi, the trail of those who came before. It was Karen who paid for the new marker. 6 months had passed since that chaotic day. The world didn't explode. The headlines faded. People moved on. But something subtle shifted, not just in the neighborhood, but in me. Karen never apologized publicly. But privately, she asked to meet. She showed up with a small envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, trembling in tone. She admitted she let fear, pride, and false authority speak louder than truth. She said her ex-husband, Judge Vance, had shielded her from the consequences of the past for too long. But that morning, the one where she called the cops on me, she realized something terrifying. She realized she didn't even know whose land she was standing on. That meeting didn't end with a hug or a handshake. We just sat, facing the woods, 2 people carrying different kinds of guilt and memory. And for once, there was no yelling, no superiority, just silence and the weight of history between us. Weeks later, a new agreement passed. The HOA, now dissolved, was replaced by a cooperative land trust. Residents still paid dues, but now they went to preserve the land's heritage, to plant native trees, to rebuild old footpaths, to fund scholarships for indigenous youth whose families were pushed out decades ago. And every month, a tour group walks the trail. I guide them sometimes. School kids, college students, curious locals. We start where Karen once tried to have me arrested, and I tell them the story, not just about her, or me, or even the cops, but about how easy it is to erase someone when you don't ask who they are. I show them my great-grandfather's tools, the drone footage, the old deeds. I tell them about Agent Lou, about Mary White Owl, and about a trail older than most city maps. Sometimes people cry. Sometimes they say nothing, and that's fine. Because legacy isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout or stand on ceremony. It sits quietly in the roots of an old tree, in the dusty corners of a cabin that was almost forgotten, in the calm silence of a man who chose patience over age. That's the funny thing about people like Karen. They think the loudest voice wins. The one who yells first, who dials 911 the fastest, who looks the most official. But they forget something critical. Some people have backup they can't even see. I wasn't alone that day. I carried the weight of my ancestors, the law that finally caught up, the quiet strength of stories that refused to be erased. And when Karen called the cops on me, she didn't just trigger protocol. She summoned a reckoning. And the land, Our land finally spoke back. Now, when I walk that trail, I wear the same hat, same boots, but there's no tension in my shoulders, no folded paper in my jacket. I don't need proof anymore. I am the proof. So the next time someone calls the cops thinking they know exactly what they are dealing with, they might want to ask one more question. Because sometimes the person they try to push off the land is the only reason that land still remembers who it belongs to.